October 25th, 1944. 4,200 feet above Leyte Gulf, Philippines, Lieutenant Yukio Seki feels his Zero fighter vibrate as he pushes the throttle forward, leading 4 other aircraft in a steep dive toward the American escort carriers below. The morning sun glints off the Pacific, and black smoke rises from distant naval battles. But something is wrong. The anti-aircraft fire ahead isn't behaving like anything he's trained for. Shells are exploding in perfect spherical patterns. Not behind his aircraft, not ahead, but precisely where they need to be. No tracer impact. No direct hit required. Just sudden, impossible detonations that shred aircraft into falling debris. His wingman disintegrates in a bloom of fire and metal fragments. Seki realizes with cold certainty, the Americans have changed the rules of the sky. By autumn 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy faces extinction. Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet and Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's Seventh Fleet have converged on the Philippines, bringing with them armada that dwarfs anything Japan can muster. The mathematics of attrition have become unbearable. Japanese naval aviation, once the most feared striking force in the Pacific, has been reduced to a shadow of its former strength. At Midway, Coral Sea, the Philippine Sea, each battle has stripped away experienced pilots who cannot be replaced. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi stands in the operations room at Mabalacat Airfield on Luzon, studying reconnaissance photographs of the American fleet. The images show forests of radar masts, dozens of carriers, hundreds of support vessels. Conventional attacks have failed. Torpedo bombers shot down before releasing their weapons. Dive bombers blown apart by curtains of flak. The kill ratio has become obscene. 30 Japanese aircraft lost for every American ship damaged. Onishi makes a calculation that will define the final year of the Pacific War. If conventional attacks achieve nothing, then unconventional attacks, attacks where death is guaranteed but success is possible, become rational. The Takotai, Special Attack Units, receive official sanction. The Western Allies will call them Kamikazes, after the divine wind that destroyed Mongol invasion fleets in the 13th century. The logic is brutal and mathematical. A conventional attack requires a pilot to approach a target, release ordnance, and escape through defensive fire. 3 separate phases where failure means mission failure. A kamikaze attack collapses these phases into one. The aircraft becomes the ordnance. The pilot becomes the guidance system. There's no escape phase. No need to survive the attack run. One aircraft, one pilot, one ship. This is the equation Onishi presents to his aviators. On October 19, 1944, Lieutenant Yukio Seki volunteers to lead the first official kamikaze unit. He is 23 years old, a graduate of the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy, married for less than a year. When asked why he volunteers, Seki responds with characteristic restraint. Japan is in a terrible situation. I must do what I can. He does not mention honor, glory, or the emperor. He speaks like a professional naval officer accepting an assignment. The Shimpu Special Attack Unit, Seki's command, consists of 5 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters. Each aircraft is stripped of unnecessary equipment. No radio for the return journey. Minimal fuel, just enough to reach the target zone. Each Zero carries a 250-kilogram bomb secured beneath the fuselage. The mathematics are simple. 250 kilograms of high explosive, delivered at 300 miles per hour, directly into a ship's superstructure or flight deck. Training for kamikaze pilots is paradoxically brief and intensive. They practice shallow diving attacks, aiming for maximum structural damage. Hit the waterline and you risk the bomb detonating ineffectively against armor. Hit the superstructure and you destroy command facilities, radar installations, fire control systems. Hit the flight deck of a carrier and you transform it from a floating airbase into a floating bonfire. But there's a problem the Japanese high command hasn't fully grasped. American defensive technology has not remained static. In a laboratory at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory in Maryland, a team of scientists and engineers have been working on a problem that has vexed military planners since the invention of anti-aircraft guns. How do you make an artillery shell hit a moving aircraft? Traditional anti-aircraft fire relies on prediction and volume. Gunners calculate where an aircraft will be in 3 seconds, fire a shell to that point, hope the timing is perfect. The shell must pass within roughly 10 feet of the target to cause damage. A needle-in-haystack proposition when the target is moving at 300 miles per hour and maneuvering. During the early war years, American naval vessels fire an average of 2,500 anti-aircraft shells for every enemy aircraft destroyed. The Pacific Ocean floor is littered with tons of American ordnance that exploded harmlessly in empty sky. The solution arrives in the form of the VT fuse, the proximity fuse. The name is deliberately deceptive. VT stands for variable time, but the fuse doesn't measure time at all. It's a miniaturized radar transmitter and receiver packed into the nose of a 5-inch anti-aircraft shell. As the shell flies through the air, it continuously broadcasts radio waves. When those waves bounce back from a nearby object, like an aircraft, the return signal triggers the detonation. The engineering challenges are staggering. The fuse must survive the acceleration of being fired from a naval gun, forces exceeding 20,000 Gs. It must remain stable while spinning at 500 rotations per second. It must function in tropical heat, Arctic cold, rain, humidity. It must distinguish between an aircraft and the ocean surface below. And it must do all this using vacuum tube technology, miniaturized to fit inside a shell casing. By 1943, these problems are solved. The fuse works, and it works with terrifying efficiency. When a VT-fused shell approaches an aircraft, it doesn't need to hit. It only needs to pass within 70 feet, roughly the wingspan of a bomber. At that distance, the shell detonates automatically, creating a spherical blast cloud of high explosive force and steel fragments. Each fragment becomes a supersonic projectile capable of puncturing aluminum skin, severing control cables, penetrating fuel tanks. The U.S. Navy guards this technology with obsessive secrecy. VT-fused shells are never used over land until late in the European War. Too much risk that an unexploded shell will fall into enemy hands for reverse engineering. They're used exclusively over water, where duds sink into the ocean. American gunners receive strict orders. If a shell fails to fire, jettison it immediately. No exceptions. By October 1944, when Lieutenant Seiki leads his Kamikaze unit toward Leyte Gulf, every major American warship in the Pacific carries VT-fused ammunition. The destroyer screens, the cruiser escorts, the battleship formations, all of them can now create aerial minefields of timed explosions. And the Japanese have no idea this technology exists. October 25, 1944. Dawn breaks over Leyte Gulf. Seiki's 5 Zeros lift off from a Balakat airfield, flying low over the Philippine jungle before ascending to altitude. They maintain radio silence. There will be no communication with base, no updates, no requests for guidance. They're already dead men, technically. This is just the fulfillment of an administrative decision made days ago. The flight toward the American fleet takes 3 hours. Seiki can see the smoke on the horizon long before he can see individual ships, the accumulated exhaust and battle damage from ongoing naval engagements. As they close within 50 miles, American radar operators on dozens of ships mark their approach. Combat information centers come alive with reports. 5 bogies, bearing 270, Angels 4, inbound hot. The escort carrier USS St. Lo sits in the middle of Taffy 3, a formation of 6 escort carriers, and their destroyer screens. These aren't the massive fleet carriers that fought at Midway. Escort carriers are converted merchant hulls, slow, lightly armored, designed for anti-submarine patrol and ground support. But they're still valuable. Each one carries 30 aircraft. Sink 1 and you've eliminated an entire air group. As Seiki's formation approaches, the American response begins. First, combat air patrol fighters, Grumman F-6F Hellcats, scramble to intercept. Radio calls fill the air. Tally-ho, tally-ho, bandits at Angels 4 engaging. But Seiki has timed his attack for a moment when the CAP is scattered. Some fighters low on fuel, some engaging a separate Japanese strike from a different direction. 3 of Seiki's aircraft are shot down by Hellcats before they can approach the fleet. But Seiki and 1 wingman break through the fighter screen. Now they face the anti-aircraft fire. Traditional flak begins first, black puffs of smoke from timed fuze shells detonating at predetermined altitudes. Seiki has trained for this. He jinks left, right, uses the sun at his back, maintains speed. The black bursts bloom behind him, beside him, always a second too late or too early. This is the anti-aircraft fire he understands. This is survivable. Well, it would be survivable if he were planning to survive. But then the proximity-fused shells enter the equation. Seiki sees his wingman explode. Not hit, explode. The Zero simply disintegrates in midair, transformed from an aircraft into a cloud of aluminum fragments and burning aviation fuel. There was no tracer leading to the impact point. No shell visibly struck the fuselage. Just sudden, catastrophic structural failure. Seiki has seconds to process this before shells begin detonating around his own aircraft. They're not forming black smoke puffs at fixed altitudes. They're detonating in real time, tracking his movements. He dives. A shell explodes 30 feet above him. He climbs. Another shell detonates 40 feet to his right. The blast wave rocking his Zero, fragments puncturing his wing. It's as if the Americans can read his mind, predict his movements, place explosions exactly where they'll do maximum damage. His engine is damaged. He can feel it in the vibration, the slight loss of power. But he's close now, less than 2,000 feet from St. Lo. He pushes the throttle forward despite the protesting engine, aims for the center of the flight deck. Anti-aircraft tracers fill the air like orange streams. A 5-inch shell detonates 30 feet ahead of him. The blast cloud an invisible wall that his aircraft slams into at 280 miles per hour. The Zero shudders. The windscreen cracks. But Seiki maintains control. At 10:53 a.m., his aircraft strikes USS St. Lo just aft of the forward elevator. The 250-kilogram bomb penetrates the flight deck before detonating inside the hangar. Secondary explosions follow. Aviation fuel, armed aircraft, ammunition stores. Within minutes, St. Lo is finished. She will sink in under an hour, first major American warship sunk by kamikaze attack. But Seiki's success is an outlier. 5 aircraft launched. 4 pilots killed. 1 ship sunk. From a strategic perspective, the mathematics aren't favorable. From the American perspective, the attack is concerning but not catastrophic. From the Japanese perspective, it's proof the kamikaze concept works. But none of them, not Onishi, not Halsey, not the Japanese High Command, understand yet how the proximity fuse is about to change everything. In the weeks following Seiki's attack, kamikaze operations intensify. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft are committed to special attack missions. The logic seems sound. If 1 aircraft can sink an escort carrier, then 10 aircraft can devastate a task force. The Japanese begin converting everything that can fly into kamikaze platforms. Zero fighters, Val dive bombers, K-torpedo bombers, even training aircraft with minimal military value in conventional roles. But the kill rate plummets. American ships are now fully stocked with VT-fused ammunition. Gunnery officers have refined their defensive tactics. They establish engagement zones, destroy incoming kamikazes at 8,000 yards if possible, 4,000 yards as a fallback, 1,000 yards as a last resort. The proximity fuse makes each of these zones exponentially more lethal. A kamikaze pilot approaching at 300 miles per hour covers 440 feet per second. In the final minute of his attack run, he must fly through 5 nautical miles of defensive fire. In that minute, a Fletcher-class destroyer can fire approximately 60 VT-fused 5-inch shells. Each shell creates a lethal blast radius of roughly 70 feet. The mathematics become brutal. The pilot must fly through an aerial minefield where death zones appear and disappear faster than human reaction time. Japanese pilots begin reporting, those few who survive aborted missions, that American anti-aircraft fire has become supernatural. They describe shells that follow their aircraft, explosions that appear without warning. invisible walls that destroy aircraft without visible impact. Some pilots believe the Americans have developed a new type of automatic tracking gun. Others think it's a form of advanced radar-directed fire control. None of them understand the actual mechanism. Miniaturized radar in each individual shell. By November 1944, the statistics tell a devastating story. In the first week of kamikaze operations, roughly 8% of special attack aircraft successfully strike their targets. By late November, that figure drops to 4%. By December, it's hovering around 2 to 3%. For every 100 kamikaze pilots who take off, 97 die without accomplishing their mission. Their aircraft become falling debris, exploded midair by shells that seem to anticipate their every movement. The psychological impact on Japanese aviators is profound. Conventional combat pilots, even in desperate circumstances, retain some sense of agency. You can dodge, evade, outmaneuver. But kamikaze pilots in the era of VT fuses are confronting something that feels less like combat and more like execution. You fly toward your target knowing that the air around you will spontaneously fill with explosions. You cannot avoid what you cannot see. You cannot evade what activates automatically. American combat reports from this period describe kamikaze aircraft being destroyed in ways that seem almost impossible. A Zero fighter approaching USS Intrepid is hit by 3 proximity-fused shells in 6 seconds. The first severs the left wing. The second detonates near the engine. The third explodes directly under the fuselage. The pilot's body never recovered. The aircraft distributed across a cubic acre of sky as falling scrap. But the kamikazes keep coming, because for Japan in late 1944, there are no good options remaining. In a briefing room at Kanoya Air Base in Kyushu, a young pilot named Ensign Taro Yamaguchi listens to his commanding officer explain the mission parameters for tomorrow's special attack. Yamaguchi is 19 years old. He learned to fly 6 months ago. His total flight time is approximately 70 hours, barely enough to qualify as a competent aviator, let alone a combat pilot. But Japan has run out of experienced pilots. They've run out of fuel for extensive training. They've run out of time. Yamaguchi and 15 other pilots will take off at dawn, fly south toward the American invasion fleet off Okinawa, and dive their aircraft into enemy ships. The briefing officer shows reconnaissance photographs of American vessels, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, carriers. He explains the targeting priorities. Carriers first, then battleships, then cruisers, then destroyers. He does not explain what the defensive fire will look like. He does not mention the proximity fuse. He doesn't know about it. That night, Yamaguchi writes a letter to his parents. It's a standard farewell letter, composed according to the formula all kamikaze pilots use. He expresses gratitude for their upbringing. He affirms his loyalty to the emperor. He promises his death will serve Japan's ultimate victory. But between the formal phrases, there's a sentence that reveals something else. I am not afraid of dying, but I am afraid of dying for nothing. At 5:30 the next morning, Yamaguchi Zero takes off from Kanoya. The 16-aircraft formation flies low over the East China Sea, maintaining radio silence. They climb to 12,000 feet as they approach Okinawa, where American radar marks their approach. Combat air patrol fighters scramble. But the kamikazes have numbers on their side this time. 16 aircraft coming from one direction, 12 more coming from another, 8 more from a third. The Americans cannot intercept them all. Yamaguchi's formation breaks through the fighter screen. 5 aircraft are shot down by Hellcats, but 11 continue toward the fleet. Now they face the anti-aircraft fire. What happens next is recorded in the combat logs of USS Laffey, a destroyer on radar picket duty. Laffey's gun director tracks the incoming kamikazes, assigns target priorities, begins firing. The 5-inch guns, all loaded with VT-fused shells, open up at 8,000 yards. The first kamikaze explodes at 7,200 yards, the shell detonating 20 feet from the cockpit. The pilot killed instantly, the aircraft tumbling into the ocean. The second kamikaze explodes at 6,800 yards. The third at 5,400 yards. Yamaguchi watches 3 aircraft ahead of him disintegrate. He pushes his stick forward, diving to gain speed. A proximity shell detonates above him. He feels the blast wave, hears fragments strike his wings. His canopy cracks, but he's still flying. He can see Laffy now. Gray steel against blue water. Every gun firing. The air around the destroyer filled with tracers and shell bursts. At 3,000 yards, another shell detonates 30 feet to his left. The blast shreds his left aileron. The Zero begins rolling. Yamaguchi fights the stick, trying to maintain control. He's close. Close enough that he can see individual sailors on Laffy's deck. Close enough that success seems possible. At 1,200 yards, a VT-fused shell explodes 15 feet ahead of his propeller. The blast cloud acts like a wall of steel. Fragments puncture his engine, his fuel tank, his wings, his fuselage. The Zero's engine seizes. Fire erupts from cowling, but momentum carries him forward. He's descending now, more falling than flying. But he's pointed at Laffy, and he's still traveling at 200 miles per hour. At 400 yards, a 40mm Bofors round, not proximity-fused, just a traditional anti-aircraft shell, strikes Yamaguchi's Zero directly in the engine block. The aircraft breaks apart. Pieces of aluminum and steel rain down around Laffy, splashing into the ocean. Ensign Taro Yamaguchi dies without striking his target. One of 11 kamikazes destroyed in approximately 4 minutes of combat. This scene repeats itself hundreds of times during the Okinawa campaign. American destroyers on radar picket duty face wave after wave of kamikaze attacks. Some ships are hit despite the proximity fuse. The technology is devastating, but not perfect. USS Laffy herself survives 6 kamikaze impacts and 4 bomb hits during a single day of combat, becoming known as the ship that would not die. But for every ship that's hit, dozens of kamikazes are destroyed short of their targets, blasted apart by shells they never saw coming. By April 1945, during the height of the Okinawa campaign, the statistical reality of kamikaze warfare has become undeniable. American after-action reports show that anti-aircraft effectiveness has increased by approximately 500% compared to early war performance. Where it once took 2,500 shells to destroy a single enemy aircraft, it now takes roughly 500 shells, and each shell has a much higher probability of causing a kill. But the proximity fuse's impact extends beyond simple mathematics. It changes the psychological calculus of kamikaze attacks. Japanese pilots no longer face a defensive system they can understand and potentially overcome. They face something that seems almost supernatural, explosions that occur without warning, in perfect positions to cause maximum damage. The technical superiority of American anti-aircraft defenses becomes a form of psychological warfare. Intelligence reports from interrogated Japanese airmen reveal the depth of this demoralization. One captured kamikaze pilot, whose aircraft was so badly damaged by proximity-fused shells that he was forced to ditch in the ocean and was subsequently rescued by American forces, describes the experience. It was like flying into a storm made of explosions. Every second, the air around me was tearing apart. I could not see the shells, could not predict where they would explode. I understood that I was already dead, but my aircraft kept flying until it didn't. The proximity fuse also transforms American naval doctrine. Before its introduction, ships sailing close together created overlapping fields of fire, but also risked hitting friendly vessels with their anti-aircraft shells. VT-fused shells eliminate this concern. They detonate near aircraft, not near friendly ships. This allows American task forces to adopt tighter formations with more concentrated firepower. At a technical level, the fuse represents one of the most significant innovations of the Pacific War, comparable in impact to radar, sonar, or the atomic bomb. Unlike those technologies, however, the proximity fuse remains relatively unknown in popular memory. There are no dramatic photographs of proximity shells detonating, no mushroom clouds, just statistical graphs showing the steady increase in anti-aircraft kill rates. Dry numbers that represent thousands of Japanese lives ended in mid-air explosions. The U.S. Navy manufactures more than 22 million proximity fuses during World War II. Each one contains a miniaturized radio transmitter, receiver, amplifier, and detonator, an extraordinary feat of mass production given the technological complexity. The cost per fuse is approximately $18 and $1945. The cost of a Japanese kamikaze pilot's training, aircraft, and ordnance is roughly equivalent to $20,000 in contemporary terms. The asymmetry is stark. An $18 fuse can destroy a $20,000 investment in seconds. Japanese engineers eventually capture intact proximity-fused shells after some duds fall on Okinawa's beaches. They reverse-engineer the technology and begin development of their own version. But by the time Japanese industry could potentially mass-produce proximity fuses, the war is over. The technology arrives too late to change Japan's strategic situation, a recurring theme in the final year of the Pacific War, where Japanese innovation consistently lags 6 to 12 months behind practical deployment timelines. By August 1945, the Kamikaze program has consumed more than 4,000 Japanese pilots and destroyed perhaps 50 American ships while damaging several hundred more. The trade ratio seems favorable from a pure numbers perspective, 4,000 lives for 50 ships. But this calculation ignores context. Japan cannot replace those 4,000 pilots. Japan cannot replace their aircraft. Japan cannot maintain this rate of attrition. America, by contrast, continues launching new ships, training new sailors, producing new proximity fuses at rates that eclipse Japanese industrial capacity. The final kamikaze missions occur in early August, days before the atomic bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These missions are flown by pilots who know Japan is losing, who know the kamikazes haven't altered the strategic picture, but who fly anyway because the order exists and because their culture demands obedience even in futility. One of these final pilots is Lieutenant Sadao Sino, a veteran aviator with actual combat experience, a rarity by August 1945. Sino volunteers for a kamikaze mission, not out of naive patriotism, but out of a cold assessment that he will die regardless. If the Americans invade Japan, he will die in a hopeless defensive battle. If he refuses orders, he will be executed or ostracized. If he flies the mission, he at least dies doing what he's trained for. Sino's mission briefing is perfunctory. The American fleet is reported near the coast of Honshu. He will fly a bomb-laden Zero toward the largest ship he can find. He will not return. The briefing officer does not mention that American ships now carry proximity fuses. This information is either unknown to the Japanese High Command or considered irrelevant. Either way, it doesn't matter to Sino's mission parameters. On August 9th, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb falls on Nagasaki, Sino takes off from a small airfield north of Tokyo. He flies alone. There are no longer enough operational aircraft for large formations. As he approaches the reported location of American vessels, he sees nothing. The intelligence is outdated. The ships have moved. Sino circles, searching. His fuel is limited. He has perhaps 30 minutes of flight time remaining. Then he spots a destroyer on the horizon, possibly conducting bombardment operations against coastal targets. He turns toward it, descending to attack altitude. The destroyer's radar marks him at 10 miles. Combat Information Center identifies him as a single bogey. Threat level minimal, but protocol requires engagement. Gun crews stand to stations. 5-inch guns train on his approach vector. The proximity-fused shells load into the breaches. At 4 miles, the destroyer opens fire. Sino sees the muzzle flashes, counts the guns. 4 5-inch mounts, multiple 40mm positions, dozens of smaller caliber weapons. In his mind, he calculates approach vectors, tries to anticipate where the shells will explode based on traditional anti-aircraft patterns. But the shells don't follow traditional patterns. The first detonates 400 feet ahead of him. He flies directly through the expanding shrapnel cloud. Fragments punch through his cowling, his wings, his canopy. One fragment strikes his left arm, nearly severing it. The Zero lurches. He maintains control with his right hand, adjusting course, still closing. The second shell detonates 60 feet to his right, the blast wave rolling his aircraft 30 degrees. He compensates, levels out. Blood from his arm is pooling in the cockpit, making the controls slippery. He's 3 miles from the target now. Close. So close. The third shell detonates directly under his aircraft. A perfect shot. Mathematically perfect. The kind of shot that's impossible without automated guidance. The blast lifts the zero, flips it inverted. Sino's head strikes the canopy. The world becomes confusion. Sky, water, ship, sky again. He pulls the stick, tries to regain orientation. The fourth shell ends it, detonating 20 feet behind the cockpit. It severs the Zero's tail section. The aircraft becomes unflyable, just a fuselage with wings attached, tumbling toward the ocean at terminal velocity. Sino has perhaps 3 seconds of consciousness remaining. He does not think about the Emperor, or Japan, or honor. He thinks about his younger brother, who wanted to be a teacher, who will now never teach anything to anyone because he died at Iwo Jima. Lieutenant Sadao Sino's Zero impacts the Pacific Ocean at 11:37 a.m., approximately 2 miles from its intended target. The destroyer continues its patrol. The gun crews secure from general quarters. In the combat log, an officer writes, "Single bogey splashed at 1,137 hours. Range 3,400 yards. No damage to ship. Expended 6 VD rounds. 6 shells. 1 aircraft. 1 life." The mathematics of the proximity fuse, rendered in its most basic form. When the war ends on August 15, 1945, the Kamikaze program dies with it. In total, approximately 3,800 Japanese pilots died in special attack missions. They sank 47 Allied ships and damaged more than 300 others. The human cost on the American side was significant. 4,900 sailors killed by kamikaze attacks, thousands more wounded. But the strategic impact was limited. The kamikazes slowed the American advance. They did not stop it. They inflicted damage. They did not change the war's outcome. The proximity fuse's role in limiting kamikaze effectiveness remains classified for years after the war. When the technology finally becomes public knowledge, military historians recognize it as one of the most significant defensive innovations of World War II. Some analyses suggest that without VD fuses, kamikaze attacks might have sunk twice as many ships, killed twice as many sailors, potentially delayed American operations by months. The Okinawa campaign might have been bloodier. The invasion of Japan, had it occurred, might have faced thousands of kamikaze attacks daily, each with a higher probability of success. But these are counterfactuals. What actually happened is recorded in combat logs, after-action reports, and the statistical tables compiled by both sides. The proximity fuse transformed American anti-aircraft fire from a weapon of attrition into a weapon of precision. It gave American gunners the ability to create aerial minefields that moved and adapted in real time. It turned the sky around Allied ships into a death zone where kamikaze pilots flew into explosions they couldn't see, couldn't predict, couldn't avoid. For the Japanese pilots who faced this technology, the experience was less like combat and more like ritual sacrifice. They took off knowing they would die. What the proximity fuse did was ensure that most of them died without accomplishing anything beyond their own deaths. Their courage, their training, their willingness to sacrifice, none of it mattered against shells that detonated automatically within lethal range. In the post-war period, American military officials debate whether to reveal the proximity fuse's existence to the public. Some argue it should remain classified indefinitely. The technology is too valuable, too advanced. Others argue that its very existence demonstrates American technological superiority in ways that benefit Cold War positioning. Eventually, limited information is released, but the full technical specifications remain classified for decades. Japanese survivors of the kamikaze program, the pilots whose missions were canceled, or whose aircraft malfunctioned, or who survived ditching after mission damage, carry complicated memories. Some remain proud of their willingness to sacrifice. Others feel betrayed by a military command that ordered them to die in attacks that couldn't succeed. All of them remember the proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire, the invisible walls of explosions, the supernatural accuracy, the sense of flying into a system designed specifically to ensure their deaths. In a 1987 interview, one former kamikaze pilot, who survived the war after his final mission was canceled due to mechanical issues, describes his feelings about the proximity fuse. "We flew into the fire, believing our spirit would carry us through. But the Americans brought science. Spirit cannot defeat science. We died for nothing, and we knew it, and we flew anyway. That is what they asked of us. That is what we gave them." The story of kamikaze pilots and proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells represents more than military history. It represents the collision of two philosophies of warfare, one based on human will and sacrifice, the other based on technological superiority and industrial capacity. Japan in 1944 to 1945 was a nation that had run out of material resources, but still possessed human resources, young men willing to die. America was a nation with seemingly limitless material resources and a systematic approach to converting those resources into military advantage. The proximity fuse embodied this systematic approach. It was designed by committees of scientists, manufactured by factories producing millions of units, distributed through a logistics system that spanned the Pacific. Each fuse cost $18. Each fuse saved American lives by destroying enemy aircraft before they could threaten American ships. The calculus was cold, efficient, and effective. Against this system, Japan deployed courage, dedication, and willingness to die. These are not negligible qualities. They carried Japan through the early war period, when technical competence and tactical surprise compensated for industrial weakness. But by late 1944, courage alone couldn't overcome the mathematical reality of American material superiority. A kamikaze pilot diving toward a destroyer at 300 miles per hour, facing 60 proximity-fused shells that detonated automatically within lethal range, was not engaged in combat. He was engaged in a losing argument with physics. The proximity fuse didn't win the Pacific War, but it changed the character of the war's final year. It made kamikaze attacks exponentially more dangerous for the attackers and significantly less dangerous for the defenders. It demonstrated that technological innovation could counteract even the most extreme forms of tactical dedication. And it established a template for modern warfare where sensor-fused munitions, cruise missiles, smart bombs, automated defense systems make human courage increasingly irrelevant to battlefield outcomes. For the families of the 3,800 kamikaze pilots who died, the proximity fuse is an abstraction. What matters is that sons, brothers, husbands, fathers died in attacks that military historians now recognize as strategically futile. For the families of the 4,900 American sailors killed by kamikaze attacks, the proximity fuse is a source of complex emotions, pride in American technological achievement, tempered by the knowledge that it couldn't save everyone, that some kamikazes got through, that some ships burned and sank despite the invisible walls of explosions. The last recorded kamikaze mission occurs on August 15, 1945, hours before the Emperor's surrender broadcast. Vice Admiral Mato Magaki, the last commander of the 5th Air Fleet, takes off from Oita Air Base in a bomb-laden aircraft, accompanied by several other pilots who volunteer to join his final flight. They fly toward Okinawa, into the teeth of American defenses, into proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire that has now perfected its deadly efficiency. None of them return. None of them strike their targets. Agaki dies in what some historians interpret as protest against the surrender, others as a final fulfillment of the samurai code. Either way, he dies the same way thousands of other kamikaze pilots died, in an explosion that detonated automatically, triggered by radio waves, executed by a technology he likely never understood existed. The proximity fuse continues in use today, evolved and refined. Modern air defense missiles carry descendants of the 1944 VD fuse, more sophisticated, more miniaturized, more lethal. The principle remains unchanged. Detect the target, calculate the distance, detonate within lethal range. No human decision required in the final moments. Just sensors, circuits, explosives, and mathematics. In that sense, the Kamikaze pilots who faced proximity-fuzed shells in 1944 to 1945 were confronting something beyond their own deaths. They were confronting a future where human agency in combat becomes increasingly automated out of existence, where courage matters less than sensor range, where the individual warrior, no matter how dedicated, becomes irrelevant against systems designed to destroy threats automatically. This was the future that Lieutenant Yukio Seki flew into on October 25, 1944. This was the reality that Ensign Taro Yamaguchi discovered in the skies over Okinawa. This was the fatal equation that Vice Admiral Agaki confronted in the final hours of the war. Devotion versus technology. Spirit versus science. Human will versus automated lethality. Technology won. It always wins. The only question is how many die before everyone understands this.